Have our externals here from NZTA, but I'll hand over to Phil to make some introductions.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So just by way of opening, just to introduce the presenters today. So Andrew Corkill, many of you will know, is the agency's Director of Regional Relationships for Waikato Bay of Plenty. Chris Young, up from Wellington to join you today, is Acting Rail Manager within the multimodal team at NZTA. And James is the Te Huia Program Manager for Waikato Regional Council, who's presented to many of you before. Over to you to take us through the material.
Awesome. Just before you start, I've just come to Warren.
No, I was just going to say a point of clarity. Are we now in public excluded A? We are.
Yes.
And just Tracy won't, just for those of us that were around at lunchtime and the thought that Tracy might be able to give us a briefing at 2:30, she won't be able to. So she will send out an email round to councillors on the announcements that are falling at 1 o'clock. And then happy to have a discussion on our field trip and the train on the way home for anybody that wants to dig deeper into that space. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Warren. And I'll just make the point that there will be natural points within the presentation for questions and discussions. So if we can hold our questions until then. If you did want to signal that you had one, you can turn on your light and we'll make a note, and then we will not be taking those questions until the time. Cool. Thank you. Yep, over to you, James.
Oh, yeah.
Is it working? Or?
No, it doesn't seem to be working. My screen.
You want Phil to click through the slides?
Yes, if
for
that's
you,
okay. I'm not quite sure what's happening, but I'm just pressing the button. Nothing seems to be. So shall I stop sharing, Phil? So kia ora, everyone, and thanks very much for the opportunity this afternoon to talk to you about Te Huia. The purpose of today's session is really firstly to provide some information about where Te Huia is currently at. So what's the journey been really since the service was being planned? And we have some really quite interesting data to share with you, which we will be looking to include as part of the end of trial review. So we're very much interested in trying to present a factual picture, the good and the bad, as to how Te Huia has performed so far. And then with that in mind, the second purpose of the discussion is to look forward, because in the next few months, there will be some key decisions that will need to be made about the future of Te Huia. And this is an opportunity to start the conversation and to try and get everyone on the same page in terms of understanding the current picture. That doesn't mean to say that everyone needs to agree with everything that I say. That's clearly not going to happen. It's about having a good, robust and honest debate about what the future of Te Huia should look like. So we've got a very packed contents page there, and as Councillor Angela has said, we will be pausing at various points to take questions and discussion. And for me, the discussion is really the most important thing, is to understand people's views and what they would like to see for the future. So before we get into some of the history around Te Huia, I think it's worth making the point that we don't run trains because we like them, because we like running trains and not just buses. But there are wider benefits of rail investment that we are seeking to build. These points are taken from a 2023 Select Committee inquiry into the future of interregional rail. And they identified 4 main aspects where there is potential for interregional passenger rail to deliver wider benefits. And wider benefits are things that this government in particular are quite rightly concerned around. So it's things like regional development and social connectivity. So that's, connecting people to jobs, people to education, opportunities, promoting tourism, all kinds of ways in which the regional economy could potentially benefit from greater passenger rail connectivity. The urban development and spatial planning side of things is becoming very, very clear now, particularly in Auckland, which is clearly our largest city. But with City Rail Link shows what can be done with building intense development around train stations. And that's something that the world over has been seen as quite a benefit of rail, including interregional passenger rail. So it'll be an interesting discussion to think about how that might apply to some of the locations in Waikato, whether that's employment or whether it's housing or other developments. Other benefits, climate change, adaptation and building resilience. So one of the challenges we have, I guess, as a region is we are highly reliant on a very busy and well-used road corridor, which is State Highway 1. But if there are problems with State Highway 1, for whatever reason, is there a resilient alternative in terms of rail travel, particularly for passengers? So that's something, again, we could look at developing. And the final one is perhaps the most important one from the passenger perspective, perhaps, which is around providing access to people, particularly those with mobility impairments. And I think nearly 1 in 4 people in New Zealand has reported some kind of mobility impairment, and giving them better access to transport. And one thing that Te Huia does offer is actually pretty good access for people with mobility impairments, generally speaking, better than the intercity coach service, for example, which is pretty challenging. So those are just some of the wider benefits. And I'm really keen, perhaps, when we get to our first whole point, to have a discussion around these to see, well, how could these possibly work in the Waikato? Are these things that we actually really think are real? Or are they things that actually perhaps only apply to other places such as Auckland? So I think it'll be a really interesting discussion to have. But before we do that, it's worth pointing out that Te Huia is already an integral part of the region's transport network, as shown in the map on the left-hand side of the slide. It shows from the Regional Public Transport Plan the future public transport network, which Te Huia is shown in yellow, running from Hamilton up to Auckland. And in the RPTP back in 2022, we set out a range of both short-term 1 to 3 year and longer-term 3 to 15-year actions. Now, most of these we are progressing, and I'll actually be talking about them throughout this presentation. So I'm not going to go through them in detail, but we have completed, for example, a reasonably good short-term improvement program, which I'll discuss shortly. And we are working really well with our colleagues at NZTA in particular to look at how the future service might be shaping up. But we'll go into that in much more detail. In terms of the longer term stuff, when we get towards the end of the presentation, I will be outlining some of the work we're doing in terms of that longer term thinking. And it will be a good opportunity to perhaps look ahead to say, well, what next for Te Huia? But it's worth, firstly, just recapping on where Te Huia started from and where it is currently at. So the general election in October 2017, there was a pledge by the government, the winning government of the day, to effectively introduce what they called a startup passenger rail service between Hamilton and Auckland. And that became part of a single stage business case that was completed by consultant Stantec in December 2018. And at this point, I should probably say that I was at NZTA when Te Huia was first born, if you like, and I was the person responsible for working closely with the partners to get the business case through the NZTA board process and into implementation. So the NZTA board approved that business case in December 2018 based on a service pattern that, in all honesty, was pretty limited, and we'll discuss that on the next slide. But interestingly, in spite of some significant challenges, particularly COVID-19, the construction of the various assets that were required to bring Tahuya into being, and also all the operational preparations, particularly around safety, took about 2.5 years from board approval, which for rail service is actually not bad at all. And in fact, the challenge we had was that the original start date was 2020, which of course slap bang in the middle of COVID. So effectively there was a year's delay before Tahuya finally started running on the 6th of April 2021. And just when we thought we were out of the woods, the Auckland COVID-19 lockdown happened in August, and that effectively meant that Tahuya was suspended for a period of about 4.5 months until January 2022. So the first year was pretty challenging, to say the least. So only really since January 2022 has there been what you might say is a continuous Tahuya service. And in May 2024, one of my first jobs working for Regional Council was to help Phil write the 2-year review to NZTA, because the trial was on the basis that funding for the last 2 years would need to be confirmed before it could be continued. So successfully got that through in May 2024. So by then we started to have some data, which we'll talk about in a minute, around how Tahuya had been performing. So we're now in December 2025, and we're turning our minds to the end of the trial, which at the moment is going to be June 2026, but we'll come on to that in a lot more detail later in the presentation. Thanks. So yeah, apologies for the short typeface, but effectively the service started as primarily aimed at very early morning commuters, as you'll see from the times. So you had to be pretty early and pretty, you had to like your mornings to really use the service. So there were 2 departures from Frankton at 5:46 and 6:28 a.m. in the morning. And of course, the major challenge was that at that stage, the service only went as far as Papakura. So there was no actual direct centre-to-centre journey on a weekday. So once you got to Papakura, you had to change trains onto an Auckland Metro service to get into services towards Britomart. So quite a limited service in the morning, just 2, and then nothing else for the rest of the day going from Waikato. And then in the evening, 2 services coming back at 4:42 and 6:25. And one of the challenges for this timetable is, well, what happens in between? So you've got a lot of time where absolutely nothing is happening. And from an efficiency point of view for operations, that's really not great. So I was always a bit concerned about this timetable, and it didn't take long for it to be improved, and we'll come on to that in a bit. Interestingly, the Saturday service actually did run through to the Strand. There was a path for it, and as we'll see, Saturday service proved to be a lot more popular than perhaps we realised. So key point to make here is that Tahuya has been significantly improved since that timetable. And it really started when the service was recommenced in January 2022, though the biggest improvement was to extend Tahuya from Papakura into central Auckland to the Strand railway station near Parnell weekdays. That made a huge difference by removing the need to transfer trains at Papakura, and brought Tahuya a lot closer to Auckland CBD. As well as that, there was an additional station call at Huanui to connect with what is now a very, very frequent airport bus. And it's actually a very good service that I've used myself. That has proven to be pretty successful in terms of adding to Tahuya's attraction to passengers. And also that rather lopsided timetable you saw in the previous slide was improved. So instead of having 2 very early morning departures, we had a morning departure and an afternoon departure from Waikato, and a morning departure and an afternoon departure from Auckland to Waikato. So making it a lot more balanced, operationally a lot more efficient, and actually more attractive to passengers. So already those services improvements made a big difference, as you'll see, to Huia's performance. Other things, Kiwi Rail, I think it was, refurbished the Strand station in Auckland, not just for Te Huia passengers, but also for those using the Northern Explorer. So there's a nice cafe and Wi-Fi available there for people. February 2024, introduction of a 3rd return service on Thursdays and Fridays and a 2nd return service on Saturday, so increasing the frequency. And that improvement, one of a number that were introduced because of various reasons Te Huia hadn't spent all the money that was allocated through the operational budget. So there was an opportunity to fund additional services without impacting on rates. So all of this has been done in the original budget. And those service frequency improvements have certainly added to the choice that Te Huia now provides. In February of this year, we replaced the Papakura station call with Pukekohe when Pukekohe reopened to passenger service with a much more frequent and direct service now straight into Auckland. Pukekohe operationally is easier to serve than Papakura. And what that has meant is we've been able to reduce the journey times on most services between 5 and 10 minutes, which does make quite a difference. And then in July this year, we've introduced a single daily return service on a Sunday, again, using surplus funding through cost savings. So effectively, that makes weekend travel in either direction possible. And also, Te Huia is now the only 7-day interregional passenger rail service in New Zealand. So you can see there have been a significant number of improvements. And if we go to the next slide, this is now the current timetable taken from the website. So you'll see a much better spread of services, particularly on Thursday and Friday. So there are actually now 2 morning services and an afternoon from Waikato, and 1 morning and 2 afternoon from Auckland. So starting to become a bit more attractive to passengers. And as we'll discuss, frequency and choice for passengers is really one of the key drivers of passenger demand. So you'll also see there you now have 2 services on Saturday and the one on the Sunday. So now it is time to have our first whole point for discussion. So very happy to take any questions and comments.
Cool. Thank you, James, for taking us through that. We'll start with Gary and then Mikhail.
A number of years ago, 4,600 people in our area in Tuakau were the first to lobby for the reopening of the rail stations, which were taken away from Tuakau, Pokeno and TK. That petition was sent to Parliament and it was never tabled. It was lost. It was buried. The question from the locals up our way is, why would you run a trial for a big heavy train that sails past our town, doesn't stop at Tuakau or Pokeno or Tikawata? Everybody sees it goes past and it's got only a few people on it. Those rail stations used to be bustling rail stations in the past. All of the workers that used to go into the Westfield freezing works from Port Waikato, Tikahonga, Onifero, Pukikawa, Glen Murray, all came in locally into Tuakau to hop on the rail cars that used to stop there every 20 minutes. So people justifiably say that trial was set up to fail. If an expensive train, and I'm not going to defend the train now, if it's to be replaced with something, whether it's a bus or a multiple buses, or as Keith said, possibly bus trains or whatever, why would they run that trial and not put stations in at Tuakau, Pocono and TK, but run a train all the way from Hamilton and stop it at Huntley, and then go in and confound the Auckland electric system, rather than stopping at Pukekohe, where people can quickly hop off and they're onto a train, electric train into Pukekohe every 20 minutes. That surely would have freed up a lot more capacity for whatever the system that you run from Hamilton through. But the people in the north feel shafted from this trial and from the service that is there at the moment.
So, thank you,
Yeah.
Gary.
Yeah, through the chair, I'm certainly happy to provide some context. So, the challenge that the business case for the trial had was, how much to spend to get something going. And rightly or wrongly, the decision was taken that the Waikato railhead, if you like, would be Huntley, because there was a station already there, notwithstanding that there are stations extant, for example, at Te Kaupata. But that in the future, and this has been expanded through a series of technical studies and business cases, there are, as you rightly say, opportunities to increase the number of stations serving the Hamilton to Auckland line, not only Tuakau, but Te Kaupata, Pocono, and possibly even Ngaruawahia. And when we did an independent financial review about 18 months ago, one of the interesting issues was that if you compare Tahuia to the Capital Connection, which is the Palmerston North to Wellington service, they have a number of intermediate stations at Otaki, Shannon and Levin, which are kind of analogous to Te Kaupata, Tuakau and Pocono. So they are places that, yes, people do actually want to get on the train and get to Wellington. So whilst we can't take back what's happened with the trial, what we will discuss later on is the aspiration to develop the future service to include stations at those locations. Now, of course, all that comes with a cost associated with constructing stations. But I think personally, it's a personal opinion, there is a strong case for adding more stations and enabling people to get on trains. So it is something that we are quite serious at looking at.
Also, when Auckland cut the what is now the North Waikato free and said, right, off you go, $500,000 was given from the old Franklin District Council
Gary,
to Tuakau.
yeah, I think the hold point for these questions is for the material that we've just looked at through the slides. So if we can just focus our questions on what's just been presented. Some of these things and the questions that you might have possibly come up through future slides. And then at the end, there'll be a mop-up of anything that hasn't been discussed. But yeah, just hold those questions for the rest of the slide presentation. We've got Mikhail, Keith, Chris and Noel.
Hi, James. So mine does relate to the slide. So since you were at the exception of Tahuia, always frustrated me, or I couldn't understand why Auckland wasn't part of the partners. That's question one. And then even when you look at the benefits on the slide and the timetable now, both from Waikato and from Auckland, and the infrastructure, the growth of Pocono, 15,000, and even the growth of Hamilton as well. To me, the second part of the question is, what can we do to felicitate that from now on in? Because I think it is a benefit for Waikato just as much as Auckland.
Yeah, through the chair, I firstly wholeheartedly agree with that statement. And getting back to the business case, it was always my concern when I was at NZTA that the service didn't run into the centre of Auckland. And at the time, rightly or wrongly, it was claimed there simply wasn't capacity for the train to access the metro network because of all the other services, both freight and stopping Auckland Metro services using it. Now, clearly by 2022, that had changed because we had found train paths that we could actually get into Auckland. So immediately that problem was addressed. And yes, since we have increased the frequency slightly further and we've got 7-day services, we are now, I think, making the service more attractive, not only for people going from Waikato into Auckland, but in the reverse direction, particularly people staying overnight. It would be ideal if we had a service which allowed people from Auckland to come in and do, a whole day's business here. That would mean is a train starting first thing in the morning, and with the depot space and all that kind of thing. But none of it's not undoable. And we are working closely with AT. We meet them regularly to press the case for Te Huia becoming much more integrated with their network, because at the moment you don't really see it too much on the maps. It's a little symbol somewhere and it goes off and disappears, and we'd like to see it much more integrated. It is serving people in Auckland, so let's see that happen. So yeah, I totally agree. I think if we're moving forward and we're going to develop Te Huia further, we have to make it more attractive for Aucklanders, and of course to enable Auckland to contribute to the cost of that.
Thank you. Keith.
Yeah, thanks, James, for the presentation. I've got too many questions, but I'll restrict it a little bit. So my concern, James, is it takes so long to get from Frankton to the Strand. And so can you give us some indication of what the limitations are? The other part tucked into that is, goes back to what Gary was suggesting, one big long old train going pretty slow. Why can't we use the light rail equivalent, which is used all around the world, much faster, more frequent, carrying less passengers, and go that way? Because we've got a problem only for serving a very small part of the Waikato at the moment.
Yeah, through the chair, the journey time is a concern, because as we'll see in a subsequent slide when we get into the data, driving generally is much quicker. That's a fact, and that's a challenge for Te Huia if we're trying to get more people to use it, because they'll say, why would I use the train? I can use a car and it's quicker. The challenge we have is that the line from Hamilton to Auckland is basically set up as a freight line. Passenger services haven't really used it in any regular form since about 2001. So the standards and the speed restrictions, particularly around level crossings, are quite high. And so we can't run nearly as fast as we would ideally like to. And you're absolutely right. The trains we're using, they're effectively freight locos that have been converted for passenger use. So they are relatively slow. And so one of the things we'll try and discuss later on is what do we do about new trains? Because at some point, the carriages that we have for Te Huia, they date from the 1970s, right? They're ex-British Rail. That's how old they are. They will need to be replaced. And the question is, with what? So your comment quite rightly is we need something that is more fit for purpose for what we want to achieve through a future service, which isn't locomotive hauled ex-1970s British Rail carriages. So we're very conscious that is something we need to look at. So when we get into the future discussions around improvements, I'll say now, ideally, we should be looking end to end at about 2 hours from Hamilton to Auckland. There are restrictions in the Auckland area because at the moment, Te Huia can't overtake either freight trains or Auckland Metro trains. That's a big challenge we have because there are only effectively 2 tracks, well now 3, from Puinui to Westfield, and only 2 from Pukekohe to Wiri. So of course, as soon as you get stuck behind a stopping train, you have to slow to that speed. You know, in the UK, Rugby to London Euston, if you know those two places, about the same distance from Hamilton to Auckland. The quickest train can do it in 55 minutes because there are 4 tracks. That's the difference.
Thank you, James, for that fulsome answer. We've just got Chris and then Noel, and then we'll move on.
Thanks, Angela. The last point you make is very good. And the answer to that, of course, is we don't have the population audit, so I don't know why we're trying to do it. I'd just like to challenge you on your first slide about climate change and how Te Huia is supposedly benefiting the climate, because we had 3 reports which give completely opposite conclusions on that. So I'd like you to prove those reports correct. Another observation you made, James, was that State Highway 1 has more problems than the rail network. Well, that's not the conclusion one makes when reading this. The number of days when the train is not allowed or cannot run on the network because of shutdowns. There's a plethora of excuses. I accept that. But I challenge you, the statement that State Highway 1 is this. I have not heard of State Highway 1 being closed down, apart from an accident now and again, but that's it. Not every day for weeks on end. And the last one is that the network, as you quite rightly pointed out, is set up for freight. You can't make a silk purse out of sow's ear. I don't know what we're trying. So that's an observation, not a question.
Yeah,
You can answer it if you like.
Oh, yeah, well, I'll try. I mean, through the chair. So in terms of the point I was trying to make about climate change, it was more about adaptation rather than the mitigation. So my view, rightly or wrongly, is that one good way of promoting resilience is to have choices of modes and choices of corridors. That's not to say that one is better than the other. But in my view, if you have both a solid road corridor, which we do, the State Highway 1, and we also have a good alternative as a rail corridor, which you rightly say, I think we struggle with a bit at the moment in terms of its performance, then for me, that provides more resilience than just relying on one. And that's really the point I was trying to make. It isn't about whether one is better than the other. It's about having that choice. And that's really what it's about. And look, I do take your point. There are a lot of challenges associated with the infrastructure that we have for rail. So the question we need to ask ourselves throughout this discussion today and in the future is, what can we reasonably do to make that better? And is that good enough? We can offer a service that people will want to pay for. So one thing I'm really keen to do is make sure that when we do offer a service, people and passengers pay to use it, so that we minimise the impacts on ratepayers and taxpayers. So, that's something I'm really quite keen to discuss further as we go through. So, yeah, I agree. There are some significant challenges.
Thank you, James. Noel.
Yeah, Madam Chair, you responded to Gary's questions or statements earlier without dwelling on them. The community up north has been given explanation after explanation, and there is a lack of willingness to listen, in my view, to what's going on. Waikato District owns the stations, not the regional council. Waikato District provided in the long-term plan 500,000 to provide a station at Tuakau, and the expectation that Tuakau would be part of Te Huia. The business case did not follow that, and the 500,000 was moved to Huntly. And that 500,000 was quite short. I believe it was over 2 million by the time it was finished. And that's in the order of the next 3 stations if they take effect. So the reality is that was the decision at the time. And I think it's time for the northern community to look towards the future and continually going back and bringing up old news that's been dealt with and the explanations have been provided. And I'm not trying to put Gary in his place or otherwise, far from it, Gary. What I want to do is be constructive going forward and stop trying to beat the drums about what happened. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Noel. And my understanding also is that, Waikato District is keen to put stations in, but until we have certainty of the service continuing, then those stations are not going to happen. Right. Robbie, I see you've got your light on.
Yeah, mine's a bit of a left field one here, but I was sitting in a meeting yesterday
talking about the Whangamarino Action Plan. There's a discussion at the moment, should Lake Waikiri lift 1.5 metres? That will definitely put your infrastructure under a considerable danger of failing. So I wonder why rail isn't actually in there discussing that this asset is of national significance, and those shorter discussions need to be put away really quickly, because as of the 1988 flood, I believe the train could only, not 98 flood. No, which was the most recent big one? 98 flood. The train could actually only travel through the Whangamarino at 20 kilometres an hour due to the subsoil conditions that the train was not actually able. So it's quite a, why you're not in that discussion. I know it's a bit left field, but it's a, could put a huge cost to your infrastructure in the future.
So that sounds to me like a conversation that the network owner would need to be part of, and we're not the network owner.
Yeah.
But it certainly is a topic that I should imagine KiwiRail are aware of, and it would be part of their rail network improvement program, I would imagine, to prioritise funding for that if it ends up being an issue.
As recently as noon, I raised the issue in front of the chair and the CEO about the governance of that action plan and the need to bring in the key stakeholders at a governance level rather than an operational level. So these are the sort of things that we need to be addressing, because the key stakeholders haven't yet been spoken to.
Yeah, the onus is on us as the owner of that action plan work, right? So.
Yep. Okay, we need to keep moving.
I
Ben.
just wanted to answer, when do we ask questions of Andrew about his responses, these emails we've got attached?
Oh, I imagine later on.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep, let's keep moving.
Okay, thank you, folks. So let's just get into a few numbers before we then look at some performance data. So in terms of what has been invested so far, so prior to service launch, the trains, stations and the expansion of Te Rapa Depot, the approved funding was just under $69 million back in the end of 2018. And more recently, there is investment to install the European Train Control System, safety system to the locomotives that will be running to Huia, which is a requirement for entry into the Auckland network. So that's another 1.8 million. In terms of operating costs, now these figures are partly historic and of course partly forecast because they run to June 2026. But at the moment, our latest forecast is that running the trains and maintaining the stations will, by the end of June 2026, amounted to about $33.5 million. And the majority of that is running the train. Station maintenance is actually pretty small, about 10%, I think, of that cost. And of course, interestingly and very importantly, the revenue side of things. So again, this is a forecast up to end of June 2026. Fares, catering and other revenue just over $5 million, and the vast majority of that, about 85%, is passenger fares. So that's why I'm really keen to have that discussion around passenger fares in a bit. This graph effectively shows the difference between the gross and net operating costs. So gross cost is just what it costs to run the service, and the net is after passenger and other revenue has been subtracted. So the net cost is effectively what is left after the income from passenger fares and other sources. And the ideal, of course, is that the gap between those two is as wide as possible. So the net cost is lower than the gross cost. And as you'll see from this graph, over time, the difference between those two has widened gradually. And the key challenge will be to take forward how we manage that interface in the future. But in essence, that's just a graphical representation of those operating cost and revenue figures. Now, an interesting discussion is always around the level of passenger subsidy. So what this slide shows is how much subsidy per passenger has taken place for Tahuya over the past 4 years. So effectively dividing the costs by the number of passengers to say how much is each passenger being subsidised. So what you'll see is that it started off in 21-22 at $101, and most recently in 2024-25 that was down to 78, and that's broadly reflective of the fact that the contribution from passenger fares has increased over time, and of course the more you get from passenger fares, the lower that subsidy figure will be. One of the challenges we have is that, of course, subsidy per passenger doesn't tell the full story because it doesn't articulate how far those passengers travel. So in 2024, we were perhaps rather surprised to see a report from RNZ which said that if you look at subsidy per passenger kilometre, which effectively takes into account how far those passengers travel, the figure for Tahuya is actually lower than the Auckland Metro network because Tahuya passengers are actually travelling much further than Auckland Metro passengers. And although I have some slight reservations about the figures that RNZ used, what it does show is that it depends on which measure you use around how things like subsidy are actually presented. So if you look at it per passenger kilometre, actually Tahuya doesn't look that bad. If you look at it from a just per passenger, it looks a lot worse. So it is all about how you express the data. And the point is we have data that shows all kinds of things, and we just need to be mindful about what they show. So what I'd like to do now is go through a few slides which show performance of Tahuya against some of the key performance indicators. I'm going to give Chris Young fair warning to help me with these because they are going to form part of the end of trial review report, which I will be working on in the next few weeks and ultimately submitting to Chris and his team in the new year. So this is perhaps one of the most important indicators, which is the passenger numbers. So this is average passengers per day on weekdays. And this graph shows the average per day in each of the 5 years that Tahuya has been running. So there are 2 lines, and they are targets. The orange line is the target that was contained in the single stage business case. I'll ask Chris perhaps just to explain the purple line, which is higher, if that's okay, Chris.
Thank you, James. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so as you can imagine, in the business case, there are a number of KPIs, which you would expect in any good business case. So that's really what will form the basis of our evaluation of the trial at the end of the period in April next year. So following the restart of the service, we worked with Waikato Regional Council to say, you know, we appear to be meeting quite quickly those business case KPIs. Is there an opportunity to set a bit of a stretch target for you to really try and drive passenger growth? So we agreed at that time, and James, you and team did some updated passenger forecast modelling, and we agreed which we agreed as was a stretch target of around 400 passengers per day. So you can see from there, you know, we're still a way away from that. You'll note, of course, that 2025 has dipped down a wee bit. And I think that's largely due to a number of factors, but most predominantly there's been more disruption days in Auckland Metro this year than last year, as they really crank up the work towards CRL readiness. So we've seen those much more frequent and longer blocks of line, which no doubt has an impact on people's choice. So that's why I think we've seen a little drop there. But in general terms, you can see a positive trajectory towards that new stretch target. So we're keen to keep working with James and Phil and the team to try and make that a reality.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, just to add to the point which you made very well earlier, Councillor Hughes, the challenge we've had is since this time last year, we've had 50 days, 50 weekdays when we've not been able to run services because of blocks of line. And a lot of those days have been in the school holidays when we have both commuters and also families wanting to use Tahuya who have not been able to use it. In my view, that's made a big difference to the numbers in this year, as Chris has highlighted. And without those, I'm confident we would have been moving more towards that trajectory of 400. But we are where we are. Next slide, please, Phil. Thank you. So probably one of the biggest success stories and perhaps a bit of a surprise is Saturday figures, because as I mentioned earlier, Tahuya wasn't really hugely conceived as a service that would get huge amounts of leisure demand, but actually the reality is very, very different. So you'll see again that target, the orange line there, very unambitious for the first couple of years because a single service on a Saturday wasn't perhaps considered to be desperately attractive, but it's turned out to be very, very different. In 2021, admittedly only for a few weeks, I think about 8 or 9 services, we had nearly 300 people a day using that one service. That's actually pretty good. That's almost at capacity. I think part of the reason for that was it actually went to the Strand. It actually went all the way into Auckland. You didn't need to change at Papakura. So that's my theory anyway. Yeah, since then we have had a dip for the couple of years in 22 and 23, but rebounded strongly in 24 and 25. And we now have 2 return services a day. And we also have a Sunday service as well, recently introduced. So the weekend offer for Tahuya is good. And yet we've actually exceeded the target in all 5 years. So yeah, pretty pleased with that. Next slide, please. Now, these next 3 KPIs are things that really do wind passengers up if they go wrong. And if you like me, you hate being late, then this is the slide for you, because any service is only as good as its ability to run to the timetable. And these KPIs effectively measure how Tahuya has performed against that timetable. So we have services delayed over 5 minutes, over 15 minutes, and services delivered to that schedule. I'll show the graphs in a minute, but what you see here is that for the 5-minute KPI, we're below where we would like to be with a target, 82% versus a target of 90. But for the other 2, the 15-minute target in particular, we're actually on track. And 15 minutes for an interregional passenger service is probably a little bit more realistic than 5. So we're pleased that target's been met. And also delivering services to the schedule, we're actually on track at 99. Now, it is worth pointing out that that doesn't include blocks of line, because blocks of line are advertised well in advance, so they're taken out of the data. So this is services that were due to run but were cancelled essentially for various reasons. So very few of those. So despite all its challenges, Tahuya does genuinely get people where they need to get to, perhaps a bit slower, perhaps a bit later sometimes, but it does actually do the job. So I'll just quickly show you the graphs because they're quite interesting. Yeah, 2023 was a big challenge because of the temporary speed restrictions in the Auckland network. That really affected the performance, as you'll see. Either side of that, the performance against the target was generally pretty good. 2023, yeah, was a big disruption year. So that shows why the target has struggled to be met overall. 15 minutes, a higher target, and despite a few dips towards 90%, generally either above or close to, and overall it meets the target. And service delivery, again, apart from 1 or 2 slight challenges in individual months, most times, the majority of the time it's been at 100%. So we've run every service, not cancelled any, which is clearly what we want. So again, not a bad performance overall, given some of the challenges we've had with infrastructure, with severe weather, that kind of thing. Passenger satisfaction is very, very good. Our passengers love Tahuya. The satisfaction score is very, very high. The target was 90%, which we thought was pretty ambitious, but we have consistently exceeded that for every year. So the people who do travel onto Huia, and clearly we want more of them, do actually really like and value the service. If you go to the next slide, Phil, we just quickly show you, we've got lots of data. We can share lots more data with you, and we have done through various presentations in previous meetings. But this effectively shows the different service attributes that Te Huia has and what people think about them. So the top one is the staff. The staff make the service what it is. And things like personal safety, ease of getting on and off the train, the cleanliness, ease of navigation, they're all really, really high. And so that kind of service drives our high satisfaction. At the opposite end of the scale, the two really challenging issues are Wi-Fi, which is important because we are trying to attract people to work on the train and to make use of their time. So Wi-Fi is a bit of a challenge, and also the range of food and drink in the cafe perhaps could be a little higher, but 80% is still pretty good actually, considering that many people do complain about the food irrespective. So I don't think it's actually too bad. But the Wi-Fi is probably the one I think we'd say, yeah, we could possibly look at something better there in the future. In terms of fare box recovery, so this is a very important metric. So fare box recovery is the percentage of operating costs that are covered by passenger fares. And so for the last 2 years, we have exceeded the fare box recovery target, and that is primarily because we have increased fares to a point where we feel passengers are still willing to pay without deciding not to use the service. The fares are still relatively cheap on Te Huia compared to, say, the Capital Connection, the Palmerston North to Wellington service. So a future discussion is what do we do with fares, and we'll have that debate perhaps a bit later on. But the point is we are meeting our fare box recovery targets for the last 2 years. Mentioned earlier about journey times, and there's no hiding that the car is generally quicker than the train, and this slide shows exactly that. So this is data from NZTA, and perhaps I might bring Chris again in here in a minute. In fact, Chris, do you want to say anything about this one, perhaps? Break?
Oh, thank you, James.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Chris, if we can get some lights switched off, I do have the speaking order. And yeah, you keep yours on. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Yeah, there are actually two KPIs in the business case. The first is whether rail is faster than the car in the peak. Now, I think, to be honest, we all acknowledge that that's not an achievable KPI. Quite why it was in there, James, is challenging, to be honest, because we know that that's never going to be achievable without a significant investment in the rail network. But the more relevant one is more reliable than car. So that talks about the difference between the average and the 85th percentile travel time. So what we're wanting to see, and what we can see, in actual fact, we've got a slightly different presentation of that at NZTA, one of those box and whisker graphs. We can see that the spread of car travel time is actually quite significant. I'm just going to do this, which may or may not be helpful, but you might be able to sort of see that we've got a box and whisker diagram that shows that the travel time for car is broad and wide, and the travel time for rail, while it's longer, is a lot more reliable. So that to us is a real advantage, notwithstanding the other advantages around the ability to work and so on while you're on the train. But the travel time reliability is a real plus compared to travelling on the motorway, on the expressway, and then up into the Auckland motorway network.
Excellent. I've got 5 people in the speaking order. If we can keep our questions succinct and to the slides that we've just had previously, that would be fantastic. So we've got Keith, then Ben, and then some others.
I don't know whether this question is to you, James, but in the slide of cost per passenger, I've got a figure of $108, but there's no parameter about 108 per trip or 108 per week or what? Can you give us a heads up on that?
Yeah, sure. So that subsidy per passenger, that simply the costs, the operational costs divided by the number of passengers. So that just spreads all those costs about. So every passenger effectively is being subsidised by $108.
100 per trip.
Per passenger, so not per trip, because the trip, it depends on how long they travel for. So that was the point about using passenger kilometres. So that's just a passenger, whether they travel 1 kilometre or 100, that 104 figure doesn't tell you how far they travel. So that's the point I was trying to make. It's all about how far people travel, as well as the fact they're being subsidised for just turning up on the train.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, could we just go back one slide? I'm just raising this with Chris. I think this is very clear, and this to me shows that the car is actually more effective than the train most of the time, apart from the highest. I would like to see this in your presentation to NZTA and not replacing this with your whisper diagram, which seems to show a different argument. Can you comment on that?
I feel like we
yes.
just let them do what they want and their presentation's been the same.
Just a minute. This is something that's being explained to us, and I would hate to see what you were saying is that your whisper diagram shows that actually trains are more effective in the 85th percentile, whereas in actual fact in the lowest time, cars are much more effective between 6 and 9 a.m. Isn't that what I read from this?
Yeah, and through the chair, you're correct in that the car travel time is definitely, for the most part, much quicker.
Yep.
But the spread of variability is much wider.
Okay, and all I'm asking is that this slide goes in as well as your whisper one if you're going to present.
But
Yep.
we've got a number of data sources yet, so we can certainly consider that.
Can we go back to the very beginning slide for where it was the 68 million and very first of the. This one. Yeah, so just to clarify, the 68.7 million, was that subsidised by NZTA as well, or was that largely? And at what percentage?
I think I have
90% or?
to ask Phil that one. I mean, I was at NZTA, but I can't remember. But I think NZTA, from memory, subsidised the majority of that 68%, 68.7 million. And also on the operating cost side, at the moment, the FAR for NZTA, well, it started at 75.5. So the majority again paid by NZTA. But can you remember, Phil, what the capital costs were or not? Or Chris, can you remember?
It was definitely subsidised by NZTA. I think it was all at 75%.
So significantly, yes.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Yes,
that's
I think
fine.
that's right.
The ECB safety the ECB safety investment, has that been spent or is that projected to be spent?
That's being spent as we speak. So the ETCS, that's being fitted now to the locomotives.
Okay, okay, and that's necessary for the trial to continue till June.
Yes, correct.
Okay,
Because the running rights finish on the 30th of April, 2026.
but if the board makes a decision in April, it's a 2-month period when we're spending that money for a 2-month period.
That is a risk, yep, but you can add that.
And also it's a regulatory requirement that all QRL freight locomotives, which effectively Tahuya is, has to have ETCS now to run into the Auckland Metro network.
I understand that, but we've got an extension until the 30th of April. We didn't have to have it in place. Is that correct?
Well, running from now to April is still a requirement.
Okay, that's fine. Yep. The $33 million for trains, is that began at 75% and is now at 60? Is that correct?
That's correct. So this year it's 60. Last year was 70 and then 75.5, I think it was before that.
Right, that's fine. And so effectively 20 million out of the 28 million is subsidised in that process or ultimately. So,
Ultimately.
yep, that's fine. And finally, the one of the subsidy per passenger, is it 78 or is it 108? Which slide was that?
If you want to go, sorry, Phil, you go forward. So this one here. So yeah, 78 is the most recent in 24-25, but it was as high as 101 on these figures back in 2021-22.
Okay. That's fine. But I guess sitting here from council point of view, there's lots of nice pictures about being here on time and the passenger satisfaction, but my main concern is the cost to ratepayers, which is, I guess, what we have to deal with moving forward. So, yeah, thank you.
Gary.
Has a cost comparison been done between continuing with a rail versus the increasing the bus service and the journey duration time between the two?
Through the chair, we haven't, as far as I'm aware, done any recent work around that. Ultimately, at the moment, our main focus is to work out whether Te Huia has met its targets and whether NZTA is willing to continue co-funding. If the answer to that is yes, then the next question is Waikato Regional Council willing to continue funding, or is there some other solution that councillors would prefer? And at the moment, that's the situation we're in. So we haven't done any detailed work to look at alternatives to what happens if Te Huia didn't run. But that's something you might have to do.
Oh, Chris Hughes.
Just a couple of questions. The 78.5 minutes compared to Auckland seems to be on the high side. You've got quite a lot of 110 kilometres an hour in there now. I would expect it to be less than that. I don't know when that time was taken, but that's just an observation. I'm not sure I should ask this question too, but does the operating costs include the cost of capital plus the depreciation or amortisation of the rolling stock? We've got a 5-year trial. I'd expect the capital costs, which are 70.5 million, amortised over 5 years, and the borrowing costs on that would significantly escalate. So how is that OPEX been arrived at?
So the OPEX, as I understand it, it's on a, we don't own the trains, so the trains are owned by Kiwi Rail. So effectively Kiwi Rail charge us a leasing cost for the trains, providing the drivers, the fuel, and also track access charges. So there's a heap of different costs associated with what Kiwi Rail effectively charges. So we don't own the trains ourselves.
So can somebody answer the question? Because the $70 million been sunk into this in terms of CapEx, which if the trial ends is going to be sunk, it's gone. So has that been built into the operating costs or not? Who's paying? Who pays that?
Well, through the chair, the capital costs, as you rightly say, are things that will potentially be lost if the trial doesn't continue. The stations being probably the prime example of those. So Rotokauri and Huntly in particular, because they were created for the service. In terms of things like the locomotives and the carriages, I mean, they can be potentially repurposed in the future. So someone might be able to make use of those. But yeah, there is a risk associated with those sunk costs if the trial doesn't continue.
Okay, thanks.
And Gary.
It's largely been covered, but in the same vein, it looks like about a return on capital about 1.59%. But I suppose the issue really is the operating cost. When you look at that, and I suppose a comment, maybe we don't need to worry about the capital expenditure when the OPEX is so high anyway. And it just seems to me that it's a social train, because I look at the main reasons are social connectivity, climate change and disability transport, and there's only one really commercial reason they were going, and that's urban development. So it's never going to make money. And I suppose a comment around your satisfaction targets, 90%. I wonder if you had a fee recovery of 90% as opposed to 17%, whether you'd have the same satisfaction targets.
Through the chair, I suspect probably not. Because people love something cheap, don't they? Look, I mean, it's a difficult one because we want to make Te Huia accessible, but we also want it to pay as much of its way as as possible. And one of the challenges we have is that, relatively speaking, the service, as people have pointed out, is quite slow. It's still relatively infrequent. So what we'd ideally like to charge and what we can realistically charge are probably not the same thing at the moment. But as we'll get onto hopefully fairly shortly, I'm of the view that we can do better in terms of getting more funding paid through passengers if we provide them with a service they can rely on. It does mean having an end to the blocks of line where we say for weeks on end the service isn't running because people aren't going to pay or aren't going to be willing to pay for a service they can't use a lot of the time. So if we can get the service running really well, and particularly if the trial is turned into a permanent service, then I'm confident we can increase that level of passenger fare. We looked at an independent financial review getting it up to around 40%. Now that would be ideal, I think, if we could get fare box recovery to something like that. We're a long way from that at the moment. So we have to have some honest discussions about what it would take to get there, whether our passengers are really willing to pay that much.
Excellent, thank you. Right, no more questions, we can move on.
So effectively, we've got a number of projects in the Te Huia program, for which I am manager. The first 4 of these are things that are going to be crossing your desks as councillors starting really today. The other 2 on the right-hand side are longer-term projects, which we'd like to have a discussion at the end. And what I'd like to do really now is just go through this program in a little bit more detail. So these are effectively the 4 short-term priority projects, and this slide effectively has each project as a row in the table and a series of tasks running from left to right. And of course, all of those tasks have to be undertaken in sequence. So we've got the safety case variation, the end of trial review, discussions around the future local share, and at the end of all that, perhaps the permanent service. The arrows are particularly interesting because they show critical interdependencies between the projects, and that's something that I really do want to try and highlight. So, for example, if we look at the bottom row, the permanent service, if the Regional Council wants to put in a funding application to NZTA to make Te Huia a permanent service through the continuous programme, the council has really got to decide what its position is on the local share and what the options are for future rating. Also, you'll see that the NZTA safety case approval at the top there has to be given, because otherwise the trains can't run. So those are 2 critical interdependencies that we need to draw your attention to. Similarly, looking at the end of trial review, in April, we will be looking to submit a report, or Chris will be looking to submit a report to the NZTA board around a co-funding decision. But that doesn't mean to say that it's done and dusted, because we've then got to go through a public consultation for the local share. So again, there's a critical interdependency there. Because if NZTA turn around and say we're not going to fund Te Huia anymore, then there isn't probably a lot of point in going out to public consultation on funding options. So again, there's a critical interdependency. And similarly with the running rights extension and also the council local share extension, both of those have to come together if the permanent service is going to commence in July. So that's really just a very quick way of showing you there are some key decisions and independencies that will need to be borne in mind, and we'll discuss those more in subsequent slides. So the safety case variation, I might also ask Chris perhaps just to comment on this a bit. Now, Chris is not part of the rail regulator for NZTA, but essentially the Railways Act requires the operator of a service to have a safety case to operate trains safely. As I mentioned earlier, we have both locomotives converted to passenger use and also carriages that are fairly old in their genesis, and so the ETCS is being fitted to the passenger locomotives, as we discussed, and also the carriages are being tested for For crashworthiness, that's both external and internal, and also other interior hazards, particularly fire. And the aim is to meet, as far as possible, the European standards for those particular items. And under the legislation, Kiwi Rail has to effectively submit what is called a so far as is reasonably practicable, or SOFARP, statement to the NZTA as the regulator. And then it's up to the regulator to decide whether they agree with with Kiwi Rail's assessment of the results of the various tests and what they propose to do about them. And we can only then get running rights to trains, possibly for up to 10 years, but that's not guaranteed. Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
Oh, thanks, James. I'll just add a wee bit to it. So you're right, under the Railways Act, Kiwi Rail, as the operator, needs to demonstrate that they've mitigated all risks so far as is reasonably practicable. And they do that to our rail safety regulator, who then in return issue them the ability to operate. So Kiwi Rail do that through a document called a safety case. So the safety case for Te Huia was predicated on the trial. So there are a number of assumptions and safety statements within that safety case that were predicated on running between 2020 and when the trial ends in April next year. So at the moment, we're working with the team here in the Regional Council and with Kiwi Rail on reviewing that safety case. Kiwi Rail are leading that work. They will just need to look again at all of those safety-based statements and assumptions that were predicated on the trial and revisit them with a view to running into a more permanent service. And that involves quite a bit of testing, as James mentioned, crashworthiness, brake testing, and so on. So there's a really good process going on there. Kiwi Rail are working with us very proactively. And at the moment, we're not seeing any significant issues, but the majority of the physical testing will be resolved early in the new year, and we'll see the report we expect in February next year, which will inform what, if any, work needs to be done. So, it's fair to say that the current rolling stock has a particular, let's say, level of safety. There'll be quite a difference between that and what a brand new passenger locomotive might be like at the moment. And we're not expecting by any stretch for that level to be brought up to what you'd expect if you bought something new off the shelf, but it just needs to be demonstrated to be safe so far as is reasonably practicable. So there's a good process going on now. We'll close that out in the new year, and we'll know in February what, if any, works are required to be done.
Okay, so I've mentioned a few times the end of trial review. So the trial officially, as Chris says, ends in April 2026, but is funded up to 30th of June to allow any close down if indeed the service doesn't continue. So I provided an interim report to the NZTA in December 2025, just really with an update on where we are with the various KPIs. But I'll start to be writing the end of trial review report, which will look at the overall performance using data up to the end of 2025. So that's my priority for early 2026. So NZTA at the moment, we're looking at a potential co-funding decision on the 4th of April at their board meeting. After that, there will need to be, potentially anyway, under WRC annual plan consultation on local share funding, which we'll talk about more in subsequent slides, again, starting in April 2026. And potentially a WRC council meeting on local share funding in June 2026. So it isn't just a case of submitting a report and saying, that's great, let's carry on. There's a lot of discussions and agreements and decisions that need to be taken before we can say whether or not the service will continue. Now, this is, again, another summary of the KPIs. Now, we've gone through this in quite a lot of detail. So this is just a dashboard of various KPIs. And I don't want to... Yeah, you're happy?
Yeah. I'll talk to that one, actually, because that's actually from me. This is sort of the current, let's call it NZTA scorecard of the KPI performance. So you can see in the first column, we gave those KPIs an indicator at the 2-year review mark. The ambers within 10% of target, green and red, obviously each side of that. And we've updated that based on the information that we've got to the end of October. And I've also just put in a little sort of indicating arrow there, because while you can see a number of them have gone actually from amber to green, which is a great story, some of them are sort of within green or amber, but in actual fact, in almost every case, those KPI results are improving over time. So that's it's a good story. It's like what we want to see. So that's just a little snapshot of the NZTA perspective on the trial performance at the moment.
Chris. Now, one thing we want to discuss now is a potential for 1 year extension to the current trial. Now, this is something that has recently been floated as an opportunity. And Chris, you might want to comment on this as well, but essentially what that would look like is essentially another year of the trial continuing until the 30th of June 2027, so effectively another 12 months. Now, there are a number of pros and cons, as you might imagine, about such a course of action. Some of the pros are that it does provide another year of hopefully uninterrupted service where we can actually start to see Te Huia recover from the disruption we've seen in 2023 and 2024 and indeed 2025. So once we've got over the blocks of line for this holiday period, we are told that effectively we'll be running continuously for the rest of the year. So we won't have those periods when there's a service hiatus. So that actually gives us an opportunity to give people confidence to go and use the train when they want to use it. Another possible benefit is that we can then align any decisions around the future funding of Te Huia as a permanent service as part of the next long-term plan, the next regional land transport plan, and indeed the next national land transport program for NZTA. I don't know whether you want to say any more about that, Chris, or anything else.
Or you
carry on.
Yep. Then I'll come in.
Also as well, the Auckland Metro Network and City Rail Link, the new timetable for City Rail Link will hopefully come in the second half of 2026. That will significantly improve not only Auckland services, but the options that people have for Te Huia to transfer to different destinations within the city. So it would be really good to see whether that improvement and the opening of City Rail Link actually provides a boost to Te Huia as well, because it makes getting around Auckland attractive. We could also look at new or different service configurations in that extra year trial. That's something we're happy to discuss, particularly with NZTA. We do believe we can do more around sort of further service efficiency, effectiveness, and commercial performance initiatives. We're starting to have some good discussions with people like Tourism Waikato about promotion of Te Huia and promoting visits to the Waikato as a place to come. And also, we'd like to look at ways to further increase and promote patronage and sustain high levels of use. So giving us another year to do that may be something to look at. We could also look at completing some more longer term work within that trial period as well. So those are just a few possible pros. But of course, one of the challenges we have is, do we want another year of the service as a trial without any uncertainty at the end of the day whether it will become permanent? Is that something we wish to do ultimately as a council? That's, I think, a key decision point. And does council want to put off a decision either way around Te Huia as a permanent service for another year? That's something I can't answer, but I'm very interested to get views from around the table. Sorry, Chris, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, thanks, James. I will just, and while ultimately this would be a decision for our board, at a staff level, we've discussed it quite a bit with Phil and James and the team, and we do see a number of merits in doing so, many of which are out on the screen. I'll just sort of circle back on some of James's comments at the start about the fact that the service was delayed and then paused again through COVID. So in actual fact, when we get to April, it will only have run for 3 years and 9 months in a permanent, uninterrupted service. So, our board did endorse a 5-year trial, but we won't be anywhere near 5 years. So this would at least, you know, in addition to those points, have an opportunity for it to run much closer to 5 years, 4 years and 9 months uninterrupted. So, you know, like I say, it's ultimately a board decision, but at staff level, we do see a lot of merit in it.
So when we get to the next whole point, I might like to perhaps discuss this option. So what I've done here is just perhaps set out a few scenarios about what the future might look like. So scenario one is just to effectively commence the permanent service on the 1st of July 2026. And at the moment, I'm writing the end of trial review to make that as a recommendation, or as a hopefully a recommendation to NZTA for the board to make a decision on. That would effectively mean that the FAR would be reduced to 51%, and that would mean an increase in the local share rates and hence an annual plan consultation, which was something that was clearly signalled in the last long-term plan. So that is at the moment the sort of default scenario. 2A and 2B are effectively two potential options for extending the trial for a further year. So option one would be to extend the trial but keep the current FAR, which is 60%, that further year. Effectively, what that would mean is that there'd be no need for any rates increase or consultation, because we wouldn't be asking for any more money as the local share. And then from the 1st of July 2027, we'd then need to consider whether or not a permanent service is merited. And that would then be part of the long-term plan consultation. So effectively pushing things out a year. Option two would be to extend the trial, but that would only be at the standard 51% FAR for a further year. So that would mean an increase in the local share and hence rates, and that would still require an annual plan consultation, because that's again what we said we'd do in the LTP. And then from the 1st of July, there would be a need to decide whether to continue the permanent service at that 51% FAR as part of the long-term plan. So another consultation would be, I think, required then. The third option, or the third scenario, of course, is the service may cease on the 30th of June 2026. There may be no funding from either NZTA or from the local share from WRC. In that instance, then an annual plan consultation on service withdrawal would, the opinion of our legal advisor, still be required, because it would trigger Section 97 of the Local Government Act around amendments to the long-term plan, because it's a significant level of service change, effectively withdrawing a passenger service. So that will be something that would have to be considered as part of this year's annual plan. And of course, from 1st of June 2026 and onwards, there would be no service full stop. So effectively, that summarises at the moment the options that are on the table for future discussion. So again, when we come to the whole point, it might be good to look at those. In terms then of the fact future local share, this graph shows projections. So looking forward from 2026, 2027. The top line, the blue one, that is the projected gross cost. So what it would cost as operating to run the service, with Kiwi Rail continuing as the service provider. The two lines at the bottom, the lighter blue and the orange, they are two different revenue scenarios, a low and a high scenario. So that's the money that we feel we would be able to leverage in to offset the operating costs, the top blue line there. My personal view is that we should be aiming for, at the very least, the higher of those two lines, the lighter blue. And potentially we can do better than that, but that is just my opinion, and that is something we'll need to test through a future permanent service approach. The two lines, the green and the purple, therefore in the middle, are effectively the two scenarios for net costs, which reflect the two scenarios for the revenues below. So the higher of those two, the green, effectively be the net cost if we had the lower revenue scenario, and the purple be the net cost if we had the higher revenue scenario. So that's just simply a way of showing the difference between the projected gross costs, net costs, and revenues. This slide just shows what that would look like for both the low and high growth revenue scenarios for both NZTA and the local share. So just to remind everyone, NZTA and the local share only pay out on net cost after revenue has been subtracted. So of course, if we do manage to increase revenue beyond those two scenarios I outlined in the last slide, those figures would actually go down. That is something I'm pretty keen to try and make happen if at all possible. But it really just shows the relative contributions that move through from the next financial year through to 2030, should be 2031, 32. So one of the key challenges we have then is to discuss what options there may be if it is necessary, or will be necessary, to increase the local share for Te Huia. So we commissioned a piece of work to look at 4 different options for how the rating requirements for a future Te Huia service could be distributed across the region. What I want to do before we break for questions is just take you through those, because this is really quite a key part of the discussion. So option 1 is what we currently rate. So in Hamilton City, it's a mix of capital value based targeted rate plus $20 uniform charge. So that reflects the fact that Hamilton City clearly has 2 train stations, and the vast majority of people, of course, travel from Hamilton City towards Auckland. Waikato District, at the moment, there is just a 3.3% contribution through the general rate, and no other area of the region contributes at all. Scenario. Option 2, as you're probably aware, there is a region-wide public transport rate, and Te Huia could be included within that process. So effectively, the whole of the region would contribute something to Te Huia, but the rate contribution would still be concentrated in the Hamilton City area, which receives most benefit compared to other areas. So everywhere we contribute, but there will be lower contributions from those other areas. So Hamilton City would be a capital value based targeted rate. Outside Hamilton, a fixed unit charge, and there will be various multipliers, and for serviced versus unserviced rating areas. So the serviced areas are those that have current public transport services, as I understand it, and the other unserviced areas are those that effectively don't. And you'll see from that map the difference between the various different categories. So it splits Waikato into what's called central Waikato, which is that grey area, then regional Waikato, which is the option 3 is reasonably similar to option 2, but actually does focus more of the rating on Hamilton City and that central area. That's the basic difference. So as you'll see from those percentages, the vast majority, 94%, comes from Hamilton City, central Waikato, and Huntly is identified separately because it has a train station. So it has a separate rate associated with it. The serviced and unserviced rating areas are pretty much treated the same. As I say, Huntly does have that separate status. Option 4 is to move back from the regional approach and go back to just rating for Hamilton City and central Waikato. So effectively, it's similar to option 2, but without the rating from the wider region. So again, Hamilton City would be a capital value based rate, the same way as the PT targeted rate. Central Waikato, that area effectively in blue, would be a fixed unit charge, and there could be serviced or unserviced areas, and it could be different weightings as well. So with this one, there could be different weightings between the serviced and unserviced areas, or they could be the same, and that's just a variance. I'll show you in a minute some indicative figures which provide an outline of what the costs might look like. As you'll probably be aware, the rating principles are, as you see there, effectively it's about looking at public transport as a public good. So even though a lot of people would say, well, I don't live in an area where I'm likely to use Te Huia, therefore why should I pay? But the idea is that public transport is something that benefits the whole region, as many services do. Boundaryless is about making sure that we don't use artificial boundaries to constrain the way that rates are raised and funding models work. Future fit is very much around making it resilient and fit for purpose and flexible as things change. You don't want a rating system that bakes in things that are hard to change. Things like fairness and efficiency and transparency, I think most people would agree they are good things to have. Whether people agree that their charge is the case is, of course, debatable. But essentially, these are long-standing principles that have been established as part of the previous work that's been done on regional public transport rating. So what we've tried to do with the work we've done is work out which of those options I've just discussed performs best against which of those 6 principles. So this is something that was done by a very experienced consultant who's previously worked for WRC. So his view, as you can see in this table, is that options 2 and 3, to a lesser extent 4, are the best performing in terms of those principles. They all have their pros and cons, but options 2 and 3 are probably the 2 that beat most of the principles reasonably well. Option 1, which is our current one, is seen as being less desirable, but it does have the benefit of being something that everyone at least understands, because it's what happens now. So in effect, when we're looking at this, what we need to decide ultimately is if we're going out to public consultation on some or all of these options, how do we explain this to people so that it's a way that's intelligible, they understand. Thanks. Sorry about that. Next one. So this is the slide I trailed a little bit earlier. So this shows some indicative, they are indicative, estimates of what the 2026-2027 rate requirement might be for the 4 options. So option 1 is just, as I said, focused on Hamilton City and Waikato district, so all based on estimates of capital value, just some bands to illustrate what happens with each of those different numbers. So option 2 goes for both Hamilton City and the uniform charge for the rest of the region. Waikato serviced and unserviced should say central Waikato. That's that area in the middle. And regional and serviced and unserviced. You'll see under option 2, central Waikato has a higher contribution than regional. Hamilton is still the highest, as we mentioned earlier, and is in fact the highest in all scenarios. That's one clear conclusion from the table. Option 3 effectively distributes the rating in a different way across that uniform charge, and as you'll see, Huntly, because of its presence of a railway station, has a separate and higher charge to the rest. And then option 4, you've got those 2 variants depending on, for central Waikato, whether the weightings are as they are now, which is option 4A, or whether they're equal. As under all scenarios, Hamilton City continues to pay the most for the service. So those are just some indicative numbers which we will need to clearly validate and check before they go into any kind of public document. But it just gives you a sense of what it could look like. So the permanent service, if we go for it, is dependent on getting that safety case and NZTA and WRC funding. And to be very clear, it is about being based on the existing funding envelope, the short to medium term. So we're not looking to significantly increase services or spending. It'll have to be within the current budget. So that's where efficiency, doing the best with what we have, comes in. KiwiRail will continue in the short to medium term at least to operate the service because they are our default service provider. They provide the trains and they own the carriages. But at some point in the future, there will need to be almost certainly a competitive procurement. If we go for a permanent service, we will need to test the market and find an operator for the medium to longer term. In terms of end of trial review, these are my conclusions and feel free to challenge them. Te Huia has generally, I think, performed well in some pretty challenging circumstances, and that's not to say there haven't been issues, which we've tried to highlight. The people who use it do love it. I think that is pretty clear. And therefore, with those 2 points in mind, it's really now for NZTA and Waikato Regional Council to both decide whether those things are enough for the service to become permanent on the basis of current investment. Now, there is, in my view, significant potential to improve the future service if we build a permanent service, but it needs a robust business case and it needs a long-term commitment. Irrespective, the current carriages, which are dating from the 1970s, probably will need to be replaced within 10 years. So we need to start thinking, if the permanent service comes to pass, about new trains at some point. Now, if the trial extension, that option we talked about earlier, and we'll have discussion about this shortly, if that is going to be pursued, then one of the things that will need to happen after today's meeting is whether or not WRC wants to send an indicative letter of support for that trial extension to the NZTA board chair. So that's clearly a discussion we'd like to have in the next few minutes. Then there is a process to go through, which may include more discussion next week, potentially at the annual plan workshop. But perhaps more relevant is the workshops, which I think are on 9th and 10th of February, because that's where those details that I showed you earlier around local share and rating will effectively need to be discussed and agreed. So that's really a key date. NZTA, if they're going to look at a trial extension, I think I'm right in saying, Chris, they will do that at the 21st of February board meeting. Is that correct?
We could do
You
that,
could?
James. Yes, if it's advantageous for people, we could do that.
Okay. And then the question is, on what basis is that trial extension? Is it at 60% FAR or is it at 51% FAR? Because clearly that has a difference of local share and hence the need for consultation or not as part of the annual plan. At 60%, the council in theory could meet on the 25th of February and resolve to continue the trial for another year. But that's clearly a decision that needs to be discussed well in advance. Now, of course, if NZTA decide not to support a trial extension, which they may well do, then the next slide shows what happens. So effectively, a lot of those steps are the same in terms of annual plan workshops. Instead, then the NZTA make a decision to co-fund the permanent service at, I think it might be the 4th of April on the 2nd of April, but it's early April either way. And then it's really up to WRC in terms of annual plan consultation on that future local share in April 2026. So only if both NZTA and WRC agree to co-fund the service will ultimately become permanent.
Alrighty, James, is that the
Very glad to say that's the whole point for questions and discussions because I've been talking a lot.
fantastic? Andrew? No, that's right. Just turn it on. If we can turn all the other microphones off. I do.
It
have
was
to
just a
speak
quick
in
note. I was going to say, I know this is public excluded, and if you want the NZTA people to leave at any point in the discussion, you just let us know.
All right. Cool. Thank you. I've got Jen first up. Gary, can you turn your mic off?
Sorry.
Thank
You're on
you.
the list, I'm sure. There was a lot in that. Oh, good thing I wrote a couple of things down. On first point is, look, I currently hold the view that Te Huia should continue. And so whether that goes through a 1 year or extension or straight to permanent is obviously a whole council thing. And in my mind, it's more about how confident this council is, being at the very start of a tronium to make big decisions in February when we've basically got January off and it's not very many meetings in December. So I like the 1 year extension from that point of view. I like the lining up with the National Land Transport Plan, everything else that you've listed there, understanding the City Rail Link impact fully. So much has changed. And also the conversation with Auckland Council. I think this council and the governance of it needs a bit more time to talk to Auckland Council as well. There's a lot of uncertainty in the local government space at the moment, and so it's a really big decision in that time. So the 1 year extension looks quite appealing, and also to secure 60% bar rate for our constituent, or my constituent largely contribute, as opposed to jumping straight. So that's where that's coming from. I am really keen for us to get more context, Phil, and of the wider ecosystem that rail is operating in. Like, what is, like, just to share with the whole council what the Minister for Rail, which now exists, Minister for Transport, thinks about rail. I mean, we're getting signals, we get letters, we get talked to them from time to time, but what I hear is that they're quite positive on the future of rail in New Zealand. So I think that plays into it quite a bit. And I've heard positive things from the opposition spokespeople as well. So I'm just meaning it doesn't seem to be the partisan issue that it was last election when this was still being called White Elephant, and I haven't heard anything negative about it from the Prime Minister anytime recently. I do live in country. Yes, that's true. Around the rating, if you want to comment, I find all of those options don't talk about te kaupata up, and since that is a direction that we might want extra stations in the future, I wonder whether it's future-proof from that perspective. I recall how we came up with the regional rating model about the number of services essentially is what determined that map, and I wonder if the number of services could make a new map, but at least we could explain to our constituents it's the same model, it's just for a train, therefore the boundaries are slightly different. And I think that would be simpler than all these different connotations again. That's where I would lead at. And the last point was the rolling stock question there is who is leading that conversation about who is going to own that, because with rates caps and changing regional council roles, and if nobody is figuring out who's going to own that rolling stock, it's a really difficult conversation to have. And if that has to be us, let us know. If there is somebody flying that flag and figuring it out in that context of the national trajectory, will Kiwi Rail be it? One rail? Who? And where are we going with this? I think that would give all of us more confidence. Any feedback on that?
Right, through the chair, there's quite a bit to get at there. I think I'll start with the comment around the national political situation. I certainly detect a broadly positive and constructive attitude from Minister Bishop in particular. He is open to mature discussions around the potential benefits of rail, but we would need to convince him that we can actually deliver services that justify the money that goes into them. And that doesn't include just existing services, but future ones, which, to your point about Te Kaupata and the discussions we had earlier with Councillor Maguire about future stations, the rating options at the moment, that's basically to continue the existing service as is. Now, of course, if we're looking at future capital investment in new stations and services to support those, then that will ultimately increase the funding that has to come from somewhere, whether that's central government or local government, or most likely a mixture of the two. So those figures at the moment are just about if we continue the service as is, which is why we've crafted them in that way. The rolling stock side of things, I mean, I'm giving as much thought along with Phil as possibly anyone at the moment. My view is that WRC doesn't have to own rolling stock. In fact, no public sector organisation has to own rolling stock. There are private sector companies across the globe, including in the UK, I've been speaking to around a lease model, which effectively provides much more affordable, in theory anyway, at least in the short term, approach to purchasing trains. But of course, there is a payback period and there's costs associated with risk in particular, which if WRC bought trains, they would not pay for, but they would of course assume the risk of a very big asset, and that asset sitting on their books. There's lots of different operating models and ownership models, and it certainly isn't the case that the default necessarily has to be WRC. In fact, I think we'd probably say as officers, we'd be looking at plenty of other options before WRC, because we believe there are, I think anyway, better options for people owning and operating trains perhaps than ourselves in the longer term. The integration with Auckland, I think, is the key. So what I would ideally like to see, I guess, is Tuhuia becoming almost part of the Auckland network. So it becomes the fast service that once it gets to Pukekohe goes into the city as quickly as possible. And it's fully integrated with the Auckland metro system. So Auckland sees a benefit from Tuhuia coming in from stations at Pokeno and Te Kaupata and Tuakau and ultimately Hamilton. That's a long way off, but we are having those conversations with AT. We're having it through the business case, which I'll be talking about very shortly. So all these things are going on, but I feel we are in a reasonably positive space. We are engaging with ministers and where we can. Minister Peters is generally supportive as well. So yeah, we're doing what we can, but there's a lot to go at. I don't know if you guys want to comment any further on the national political scene or not, or your meeting.
Well, what I'd add, James, thank you, is that while there does appear to be support from Minister Bishop and Peters, there's a relentless sort of drive for efficiency and effectiveness, which comes from you all as well. So if the more we can demonstrate increasing cost efficiency and value, the better our case will be. So yeah,
sure.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So I'm leaning towards the 1-year extension myself. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jen. Hey, I'm just aware that at 2:30, NZTA will need to leave the room to catch a flight. So, yeah, if we've got any direct questions to NZTA, we'll need to get through them in the next 10 minutes. We will continue the conversation after 2:30 as needed. But yeah, just aware if you do have questions to them, then we need to ask them pretty quickly. So if we can have our questions ready. Noel, you're next.
Yeah, sorry, I have to leave at 2:30 as well. So it is a question in here. But just to set the scene, as I read the situation, as we have 300 odd people per day going to Auckland on those 2 to 3 services a day, up and down. So if we put one person in a car, that's 300. If you look at the Auckland motorway, that's probably 10 minutes worth of traffic. So let's get real. Let's really get real. This is all about massaging a few egos and aspirational. To send 300 people to Auckland and back every day at a cost of 8 million a year, 4 million from the region, to me is just a smack in the face to the residents I support the buses absolutely in the region, and I've supported that through the LTP or the annual plan. But the question is really, and I support an extension at no reduction on the FAR. But at the end of the day, when is reality going to kick in? When is NZTA going to come back and say, this just doesn't stack up? It's too big a cost to the country. And, you know, enough's enough. So I think I made the point is when will the reality really hit the road and say, let's stop massaging the egos. Let's put the business case. It's not fair on the ratepayers. It's certainly not fair on the taxpayers of New Zealand. So I really want to know when reality is going to come home.
Question?
It is. That's the question. When is reality going to come home
I
and
think I
stop
can
this nonsense?
start to address that, Councillor
Thanks.
Smith. And I mean, an extension of the trial gives another year, obviously, to test concept, etc. But ultimately, our board will need to make a decision, and they could make a decision to not extend it by a further year, even if this committee does want to extend it by a further year. And if it is extended, there will be another decision, obviously, in a year's time that lines up with the government policy statement, National Land Transport Plan being produced, Regional Land Transport Plan, and all those kind of things that may have slightly different settings in them anyway. But there is a decision point. But we can't preempt what that board decision is going to be. Obviously, we can just put forward the facts like you've received today.
Thank you. Gary Maguire.
So you're asking us for an extension of another year from the area that I'm from, 6,000 people, about 12 or 15,000 around when you take out Port Waikato and all the other areas around that feed in there. And no station proposed for Tuakau. So you're proposing the station for Pocono and TK, but not for Tuakau. So being that they were the station, I mean the area that signed the petition for 4,600 people, it's like asking the flogging shall continue till morale improves. So it's difficult to argue in favour of it.
Next on my list, Chris Hughes.
Thanks, Angela. I've got a question specifically for James. I don't have anything for NZTA, so I'm happy to wait until if anybody else has got something for NZTA.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Just who's got a question for NZTA? I'll go to you, Warren.
Thank you, Angela. Yeah, just around your thoughts about not co-funding the business case and a reason why.
Effectively, you know, we have through the NLTP a number of activity classes. This particular one is funded through the public transport infrastructure. That activity class, the amount of available funding was significantly reduced in this GPS and is just unfortunately fully utilised on other projects. So it was just a matter of funding availability at that time. And we've committed to Phil and James that we'll keep that under review. And if there's opportunities, we'll look at that again.
Okay, no, that's it. My other questions in house.
Okay, thank you. Keith.
Yeah, just a quick question. So to me, there should be an extra option. So you had 3 options, and the 4th option should be a hybrid. So I can't support carrying on as it is, but I think the opportunity of bringing, say, the Auckland Metro down to Pocono or Tikawata and running buses up to that point would be a much more logistically sensible way of moving people, and would be a lot faster as well. So have you considered that option, and why not?
Well, so through the chair, we do have existing bus services that run from Pocono and Tuakau, and indeed Te Kaupata up to Pukekohe. And through the various network reviews that were undertaken this year, We've looked at the future of those services, irrespective of what happens with Te Huia, because you recognise that any station improvements or new stations at places like Tuakau and Pokeno are some years away, if they ever happen. And so improving the buses anyway is something that we're really keen to do, because Pukekohe in particular becomes a very important access point to the Auckland Metro network. It's now got a much more frequent service than it has ever had. In the future, there may also be semi-fast services that go from Pukekohe. So we would be keen to serve Pukekohe through the bus network, irrespective of what happens with Te Huia.
Just hold that thought,
question.
Ben. Okay. Right, just before NZTA goes, we will carry on this conversation in here. But if we do decide to send a letter asking for a continuation of the service for another year with the extended FAR rate, what advice would you have to us around that, with timing and anything else that we might need to consider?
Yeah, we would just really recommend, if possible, to send it to us as quickly as you can, respectfully, so that we can try and hit that February board meeting. The sooner if we're going to pursue it, we'd like to pursue it as quickly as possible and provide the certainty one way or the other. So we're planning at the moment for an April board meeting, as you know, but we've got the opportunity to try and go to February. So the quicker we're able to get that moving, the better. So that would be helpful if you can.
Thank you. Andrew, did you have any final thoughts?
No.
Cool.
I've just got a quick question for Chris.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
Ben.
it relates to your map here that
yes.
we've got a copy of, and maybe you can answer it by email or something, but at the bottom it says car versus rail travel time. It's faster than the car, shorter journey time than the private vehicle in the peak. Now, that's not what I saw on the slide. I mean, there may be some reason why you're saying that, and I'm also more reliable than car. Difference between average and 85% time. So I'm just wondering, is that correct, and does it give a skew to the NZTA board?
And through the chair, I think that's the target. So the target was that Te Huia is faster than the car in the peak.
Oh, I see. So I've read it wrong.
It's more
Yeah, that's
reliable
fine.
than the car.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Done.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris and Andrew, for your time today.
Thank you for the opportunity to come.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, especially just acknowledging that we do have a lot to learn about Te Huia. It's quite new to many of our councillors. Just the level of detail as well that we've gone into today has been really helpful to help guide our thinking. And James, just appreciate the data that you've shown us, good and bad. That really helps us to formulate our thinking, and we'll be in touch.
There's a lot in there. Thanks for your time, and appreciate Chris coming up, but also just want to note the relationship we do have with your staff. We did want to show that we are, supporting and working with each other through this at the moment. So that's important to note for you too. See you all again.
Could I just I wanted to thank you for the presentation. It's very well thought through. It's unfortunate we had news a week ago about rates caps and councils.
Less of an NZTA issue, but still central government, right? But yeah, all the best, guys. We'll see you soon.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Cheers, Chris. Cheers, Andrew. Cheers, soon.
Right. We will carry on. Now, I do just want to hear from a few more people that I've got down on the list, and then I might call on people that we haven't heard from as well. So working through, we've got Robbie.
Thank you. My question is sort of going back to what Keith was talking about. We had some cost structures come out to what it costs to run our buses this morning at $6.50 a kilometre. Has it, it's 138 kilometres, I think, from here to the Strand. So what is actually the K rate of running the train?
Through the chair, is that cost per passenger kilometre you're after?
No, I want to know what it actually costs per kilometre to run the train.
So I can provide that information to you through the independent financial review that we took place last year. So that was reported, I think it was a future-proof subcommittee, but we've got lots of information on that we can share with you. What I'd recommend is we send round, Bill, if that's okay with you, the independent financial review, because that's got lots and lots of data about those efficiency metrics. So that, and also the comparison with Capital Connection, the other interregional service. That's actually really quite interesting, because in some respects we perform better than them, and in others we don't, particularly around revenue. So getting back to the passenger fares debate, I think we can. That's why I think we can improve, because we actually offer a better service than Capital Connection, and I think we can make more of that. So yeah, we'll get that sent round to you if that's okay.
So could we also have a costing of what it costs per kilometre to run the Wellington rail?
Yeah, we've got that in the independent review. Yeah, that's all in there. So we can send that round.
Excellent, thank you. I'll go to Chris.
James, I've just got a series of questions here and I'll just run through them and you can pick them up. Can we have a copy of this December 25 report that's going to NZTA, please, the interim report?
Sorry, which report was that?
The December 20,
Yes.
25, you
Yeah.
said that that's due. Yeah. Second question is, how does the Regional Council gain the sentiment of ratepayers in terms of their views on Te Huia? I understand you interviewing attendees on the train, which is a captive market. That's irrelevant in terms of people wanting to make decisions about whether they're prepared to support or not. I want to know how we're going to get that feedback from the greater community. So,
Chris, do you want to answer as you go, or do you want to answer at the end?
Sorry.
Yep, so Phil will answer number 2, I think.
Well, I
One
might
or
take
two?
both of them actually.
Okay.
So the December report is effectively just that KPI sheet. So there's nothing further that we're providing. So we can definitely get a copy of that to you.
So that's your dashboard sheet.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So we're not making recommendations. We're not providing a council view. We're just providing data. So that.
Yep. Thank you.
In terms of the interest, as part of the work we're doing on the future business case, we've just done a survey of users and non-users, asking them about what they would want a service to be. That specifically doesn't ask the question, do you support? Which has to be a question that comes out through the annual plan consultation.
That's why I'm asking it, because there is a lot of criticism of that survey. It's very superficial. And it doesn't, it's loaded and it's superficial. So I'll just leave that there.
Well, but at the same time, it had more responses than any survey we've run for very, very many years. So yes.
But it's the questions that it asks. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay. My next question, I guess, I don't know whether Phil wants to take it or James. Option 2, James, you had the additional cost of the additional rates impact per property per $1 million in Hamilton as being $47. Now, can you just explain, and I'm not clear on it, I'd like clarity, whether that just relates to the incremental increase for an extra year's running, or does that cover the whole of the cost of our rates to the Hamilton ratepayers or the running of the subsidy on the Te Huia?
So through the chair, my understanding of those figures produced by the consultant is that is what each household would be rated for the annual cost of Te Huia.
So that's not the incremental cost.
That's the whole cost of
Can
Te
we have
Huia.
confirmation of that, please? Because
Yeah.
that doesn't seem right. So I'd like confirmation of that. Good.
Janine, did you want to weigh in or? No? Okay. Cool.
Okay, and the other point which we did ask for at an earlier workshop last triennium was for the, and I know it's a bit of a guesstimate, but the total cost of project or to who you're continuing, what is the total rates cost into the future? Because we've got rolling stock, there's all sorts of changes in there. So it's not just a matter of looking at it today and rolling that forward. It's what are the incremental increases in the future? And the last point is on the lease model. You know, leases are, I accept that they're not ownership, but you end up with the ownership responsibilities and obligations. So you can't just say you can move it off to a lease company overseas, doesn't remove the obligation of ownership. So I challenge that thinking.
Through the chair, the discussions I've had with the Rock Rail, who are a UK-based lease operator, assume all of the ownership risks. So effectively, let's say after 10 years, WRC turn around and say, we're not running trains anymore. Sorry, you'll have to find some other home for them. They take that risk, potentially. Whereas if we owned, as WRC, if we owned the stock and then after 10 years, let's say, we didn't want to fund it anymore, we're then stuck with trains that we then have to sell. So
can I just add and confirm that if that's the case, then that lease cost will be front loaded with all the costs of the obligations as if it's going to finish at the end of year 10. So it will be a frighteningly expensive exercise.
yeah, through the chair, that is the case. So when you transfer risk to a third party, of course, you will pay more money to that third party to assume that risk. That is absolutely correct. What you do is you then mitigate your risk of owning an asset that sits on your books, and you have to do something with if funding is pulled. So it's that trade-off between how much risk do you want to take versus how much you're willing to pay.
My point I'm trying to make is that I believe the cost will be the same irrespective. Okay, and then Jennifer made a nice little introduction at the beginning and put a great story up for why we should continue it. I'd like to do the same, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to say I'm opposed to continuing the trial. So that's where I sit on it. Thank you.
Gary R.
Chris has covered a lot of it, or most of it. I also have to say I'm opposed, and my main reason for it will be that when I look at the 3.5 years that it's run, and you say you want a bit more time to see how it'll go, the step just seems to be far too big. You know, if you're close or close enough, I'd say let's give it a go and see how we go. But it's miles off. And I'd say 1 more year is not going to close that gap close enough to say that we can keep going with it. So it just seems the hurdle is too big in my mind, and especially with all the unknowns and that is around rolling stock ownership, platforms. There's just so many unknowns in that you know, I just couldn't commit ratepayers funding, and I'll check with Janine or somebody later on, but it looks like it's about 2.4% rate increase to do that, and I think that's just too much.
Right, Warren.
Thank you. Two things from me. Just confirmation that we're going to get all this local share options and that sort of thing early on in the piece for our understanding in the annual plan. Workshop, I know we've got a workshop coming up very shortly. And to me, it's quite critical rather than waiting, obviously, into February, March, when we're potentially looking to sign off on it.
So you've seen the table and you've seen the correspondence with Andrew. Their recommendation is that we don't stop doing what we're doing, even if we were to want to proceed with an extension. So the annual plan conversation next week has to pick up this discussion, and in effect we have to continue with the journey until we have clarity that there is something else on the table from NZTA.
Okay, so those figures will come to us then. My second piece is...
Sorry, I think Janine just wanted to make a comment.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, and it's probably a clarification because at the moment, in the report that you'll receive for the annual plan workshop next week, there's no information around this rating. And so I think there is a key question that needs to be asked and answered of why at the moment would we look at changing the way that we are funding the service until we know that there's longevity to the service. So at the moment, we're only talking about a 12-month extension. That doesn't seem like quite the right time to be changing the way that we're funding that. How we fund is possibly better connected with a decision to actually continue the service. So I think we just need to flush that out, I think. So there's none of this is included in the information that you'll hopefully be receiving today for next week's annual plan workshop. We can certainly incorporate it.
Thanks, Janine. And just my other piece is there were a number of emails backwards and forwards attached in our agenda. And I just note that the thing I see missing is that we have no input from Hamilton City or Waikato District, that they're not in the email chain or anything like that. So us potentially asking for a letter for extension and that sort of thing doesn't seem to include any input from those councils.
You're the decision makers. It's your targeted rate. Until this public excluded workshop has been confidential. There's a discussion to be had about what happens next and at what point there is the ability for us to talk to other people about it. But we felt that the most important thing was that you were able to have a conversation about all of this in a room in one place with the agency here.
But I mean, some of these go back to October and earlier September. Some of these emails I just would have.
Well, in a general sense, we've been providing information through to the PT, the Future-Proof PT subcommittee in the last triennium, and alongside that, there has been a working group that's had elected members from Hamilton, Waikato District, and the regional council on it. So we have been updating them via that at the right time. This has all happened during the election period, and there hasn't been that group to have met. So we haven't had any committees, we haven't had any ability to have those conversations, but that doesn't change that we have been up until that point.
Okay, no, that answers that. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren. Ben.
Yeah, question for Janine. This is suggesting that we will need to go out to the annual plan and ask, so if NZTA decides they're not going to fund the trial any further, that it stops, that we, under the clause, whatever it was, that we need to then go out and ask people as a consultation. Secondly, if they do decide to fund it but drop it from 60 to 51%, we then have to go out and consult. But that can't happen till after the 2nd of April, when our consultation is usually February, March. And so I just want your feedback on those logistics.
Yes, so I think this, and look, Phil and James would be able to respond as well. This links back to commitments that Council made through the LTP on the long-term future of the service and at what point we would go and consult with the community. And the key trigger for that is if the funding assistance rate drops to 51%. So if it gets to that point, then we are committed to having to consult. We are in a bit of a pickle time-wise in terms of actual certainty from NZTA of the funding assistance rate. But our consultation window is April. So, at the end of the day, we may well be preparing to do some consultation. We are preparing on the assumption that we will do consultation. It's what goes into that we'll need to be working through in the new year with Council.
Right. Thank you. So just on opinions, Jennifer has spoken strongly in favour of continuing the service in perpetuity, with the rolling stock, but pointed out that the rolling stock is the elephant in the room in terms of $100 million that would be required. I note here Winston Peters in his letter says that he won't support a 90-10% split for funding for rolling stock. And also Kim mentions that Greater Wellington Council contributes millions in annual funding to the rail network, whereas we only contribute hundreds of thousands. He would require a higher contribution from us if we did go forward. Secondly, he points us towards Auckland. We've already heard Wayne Brown going talk to the hand when it comes to this. And he's now been complaining that the rates cap will mean that he can't do his train network upgrade internally. So I can't see them putting up their rates to pay for our train. I think the whole environment has changed since we've having the end of regional councils and a rates cap arriving. As I understand it, we may be looking at 4.9% next year in the annual plan, of which 4.8% is transport related. So I think if we could reduce any figures on this, it would be helpful. I think that NZTA will go to 51%. That they've indicated that that's where they were originally positioned. I don't agree with extending this for another year for a trial, which would effectively let the mayors make a decision about what happens with this, not us, because we're gone by the end of 2027. So I'm saying that we shouldn't extend the trial. We should just wait for NZTA and let them make the decision. If they come back with 51%, then we have to go out and ask the public, do they want to increase their rates at a time of rates capping? So.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I'll go to Jen and then I have some thoughts as well.
Yeah, keen to hear from Liz as well. Okay? But just to some feedback, look, where I've come from in my first term, before many of the people around this room, I read screeds of long-term plan submissions that would from Hamiltonians who are majority, actually funding this. And they wanted it by what, 94, 98% of submissions were supportive. So I'm just mindful that people haven't seen that, that's all. And then I'm just mindful that it is a huge push behind it to keep this train. I have a real problem with writing off $70 million plus of assets that have been invested in. I think there's a certain responsibility there to look at how to make the best of things. I don't want this to, and I really do want everybody to delve deep into the detail on the numbers as well. I think that this council's been not doing a good job just letting the 2 transport people know about this space, or maybe 3 transport people. So welcome all of that. What I am keen to have though is I'd like us to review the fares to James's point. There is scope to increase the fares. I think we should look at that. Secondly, and more importantly, I think we consulted to start this service. I think we should consult this annual plan on what people want going forward, because you're absolutely right, Ben, it has changed completely. It might be not 94%, 98% or whatever else, but I would like to hear from the community on the topic. That's my 2 cents.
Just on that, we can't hear from the community on the topic till after the 2nd of April, when NZTA has made their decision.
We can choose to hear from the community, and Janine can talk about this whenever we want to, and it will have to align with the timing, which it already is. Happy to have Janine answer that.
But we have to ask the people how much their rates they want to increase. Is it from goes to 60 to 51? There'll be a rate increase. Are they willing to accept that or not?
I think we can ask. We can wait for Wakakotahi to give us some answers, and we can formulate our question accordingly.
Yep.
Would that be correct?
I think there's probably a way that we could ask the question of, would you be prepared to fund the service at the lower funding assistance rate with the impact of that quantified for them? Yeah. So we can assume this, but if it goes to, so are you happy here or are you happy here? It will be in the formulating of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that would give us much better data to make a decision on than all of our speculation on what might and might not happen.
Yeah, good point. Liz.
All right, I'm of Dutch heritage, so I like trains and I like bikes, but I like them both in the Netherlands, not in New Zealand. It's probably the bottom line. Look, the region I don't think is interested, in funding this. I was trying to look at Warren's face earlier when it looked like there could be a request over to the Thames Coromandel for some funding towards Tahuia, and there's just not a bar. And the same with the King Country. Why on earth could we even ask? We could never ask them for money for Tahuia. But I accept that there is benefit for the city, and I accept that there are probably some Aucklanders who like to come down to the Waikato from time to time as well. So for me, it's a city funding issue, and it's a government funding issue. If they want it, then they pay for it. And I guess that's probably where my thinking is at the moment. Don't see too much point going out to our communities, because those who use it and love it will sing the loudest and make sure they write lots of letters. Those who have no interest won't bother writing a letter or submitting on it. So that's how public consultation usually works. So I just think that, if the government or NZTA, if they want it, they should fight for it and they should fund it. And the city are the same. If there's a lot of people who want it, then it's more of a city issue. That's my thinking so far.
Cool. Thanks, Liz. Gary, did you have some final thoughts?
My last call would be that what I think would be a far less amount put into beefing up the bus services to the area that Tahuia is going to. I'd be leaning more that way. I doubt that the people in the north that have been told today that there's going to be no station and other stations will be years out. I'll be dead before then. And whereas we could have buses rolling, just increase the bus services from Hamilton through, would probably be well and truly more sought after.
Thanks, Gary. Right, interesting discussion today. Thank you everyone for your contributions. I know it's been a really long day. I just wanted to weigh in on this afternoon's topic. Mixed views around the table. I think it would be remiss of us not to send a letter to NZTA asking for 60% FAR rate and an extension. Up to them then. If they decline it, then we can go to plan B and go from there. There are plenty of people who would love what we have here throughout New Zealand. I know other areas are trying to get interregional rail up and running. I just would, not like it if we didn't try as hard as we could to keep it. Also interested in the views of the community, especially Hamilton City in particular, and to Warren's points around the view of Hamilton City Council and Waikato District Council as well. It'd be good to hear their positions as well, where they stand, especially with CTBs or whatever it is moving forward. I think we should send a letter, but leave it there. Phil, did you want to have any closing remarks? I understand a couple of minutes.
I've just overall had a really insightful day. Talking about transport all day isn't something we do very often, and I've got a lot out of it. So thank you very much for listening to us take you through everything that we do. And this afternoon's discussion has been really, really helpful, specifically around the rail service. I'm happy to close with Karakia.
Yeah,
Just
Robbie.
one quick question was to ask, when will we vote on a decision whether we ask for an extension? Is that at council? Was it now or?
Well, it's a workshop, so we can't make decisions.
The 18th, we need to make a decision on whether we send a letter to extend or not.
Well, a letter is a letter.
Got to vote whether we want to send a letter or not, though.
I think the process would be to bring it to their council meeting. To me, a letter needs the support of the council as it sits.
Yeah.
Otherwise, carrying away.
Yep. Robin.
Get it done in time for the council meeting.
We'll do our very best.
Yeah, that was basically my question was exactly that. And if a letter is going to go forward, I'd hope we send it before Christmas, that decisions could be made in early the new year.
Yeah,
Or the February meet, if you what's to go forward in February. So thank you.
good points.
Sorry, just to clarify, so did I hear NZTA say that potentially this could go to their February board
Yes.
meeting? Was it?
Yes.
Was that,
Through the chair, that's correct, yes.
yeah, otherwise it's April.
Otherwise it's
Yep.
April.
Okay, yeah, no,
So-
sorry, I just,
Gives us better timing on our end.
yeah.
Phil, would you close us in a karakia?
Can I just ask that, because, I'm new to this game, so I don't know Angela, but, if you want to send a letter, do we actually get to see the content of that letter, or do you just get to send it? I just want to,
Oh, no, we
no.
would
It's a
all
full
approve
council
it.
meeting on the 18th.
Yeah. That would be the process. Thanks,
Yes,
Phil.
agreed. Unihia mai te uru tapanui, kia wātia, ke mama, te nākau, te tinana, te hinenaro. I te ara takutu koe rā e rungu e whakairea aki ki runga kia tina, umie, huie, takie.
Right, thank you, everyone.